I hope you can see me properly. I am kind of blind in order to have this light on while I film my October wrap up, but we do what we can. Hi, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. My name is Eva, and today I'm wrapping up the books and comics that I've read during spooky season. Now, I've got good news and bad news. I tend to start with the bad news. The bad news is that I've not read as much as I wished. Just school resumed, I work full-time, I am in school, in placement. There was my daughter's birthday to arrange, my mother-in-law came over. It was just a very, very busy month. So I didn't get through all my TBR that I posted at the beginning of the month, but the good news is that I'm definitely past my reading slump. I can read, I am reading every day, maybe not much, but I am reading every day. So the good news is that the reading slump for now seems to be over. So without further ado, I'm gonna put these in from the least enjoyable read and least enjoyable comic to the most enjoyable comic or read book, and those is just an enjoyment list. It's not necessarily like a quality list. As I mentioned all the time, it's how much I enjoyed the process of reading the book or how much it left me with in terms of emotions. I will start with the books and then I move on to the comics, and I will put timestamps, so if you're not interested in one or the other, you can jump around. So I had originally around 7 to 8 books in my October TBR. Of those, I actually got around to reading 3, completing 3. The YA horror I'm currently reading, and the 3 I didn't get around to are The Historian, Chalkman, and one of the 2 non-fiction, the one about Salem. Yeah, those 3 I didn't even start. I don't think I'm gonna pick up the Salem's one. I can keep it for next year or another time of the year. These two, I do not know what I'm gonna do, because I do want to read them, but we will see. So we are starting at number 5. And on number 5 we have the other non-fiction I picked up for the month of October, which was The Ruin of All Witches, Life and Death in the New World. And I was initially afraid that these would kind of overlap with the Salem book, because it was about, you know, the witch trials and when, you know, first colonizers arrived to America. I shouldn't have worried though, because while this is, yes, covering a similar period of events that happened in Salem, this is all about Springfield in Massachusetts, a different town, and you really focus on a family that moved from England, settled in Massachusetts, Springfield specifically, and the downfall of this specific family. And a bit of, you got the players in this book, which are like the people living in Springfield as Springfield is kind of being born and developing. And yes, it has to do with witches, but it is very much like a slice of life and the downfall again that comes with witchcraft or with accusation of witchcraft. And it was very insightful in the, you know, everyday life of this family and how at the time, you know, the settlers lived. However, it was not the kind of book I was expecting. It was very much like a historical book, and I don't mind that, but I wonder if I would have read these at a different time, not with the expectations I had of reading a witchy book or like a non-fiction about witches and witches trials and so on. So it was very specific. It was like only on that specific family and on that specific point in time. And I feel like saying also it was quite uneventful. Yes, toward the end there is all the witch trials stuff, but even that, it is very much the end, not the core of his story. And it wasn't the kind of book that I expected it to be. And while sometimes, you know, a book that does not meet expectations is necessarily negative, it could actually be a pleasant surprise. This one fell in the category of books that were not what I expected them to be, but ultimately felt flat. Probably his writing wasn't necessarily very entertaining as well. I've read plenty of non-fiction by now, and I think the writing does do a lot when you write a non-fiction like this, where like a slice of life. So I wasn't impressed by his writing, and in general it was kind of dragging and a bit dull, which is saying something when you're talking about people accusing or being accused of witchcraft. So yeah, 3 stars though. I appreciated though that I did learn some of those kind of things that I've never kind of experienced before, read before, about, you know, settlers' lives and all of that. But yeah, it was okay. The next one is not, I'm not going to speak much about it because I always think that the book clubs books, I have much more to say about them once I've actually discussed them with my book club and kind of gathered their views and kind of tested my views against theirs or together with theirs. So it's a December pick. I found the audiobook and listened to it. Also, it's not horror at all. And sorry if you hear any background noise, but it is bonfire night tomorrow in England, and so people are doing fireworks 20 hours in advance because, but why not? Anyway, so it's a literature fiction translated from Japanese, and it's Breasts and Eggs, quite a famous one from my understanding in the like literature fiction, translated fiction genre. And it's really the story of this woman where she's approaching, you know, kind of getting older, and she is alone. She doesn't have any children. She has a strong and odd relationship at the same time with her sister, older sister, and her niece, and it's her navigating the, you know, the family dynamics, but also, you know, do I want a family? They're questioning herself if she wants a family, she wants a child, a partner, and everything that comes with it. Not my usual genre. I would probably have not reached out for this book if it wasn't for my book club. So very grateful at the same time that my book club puts me in front of books that otherwise I would have not picked up. This is the whole aim, I guess, of having a book club. So the discussion has not happened yet, and I will give this 3 stars. I found that I've compared it, for example, to the other non-fiction that I just mentioned. The writing was definitely more appealing because this was kind of a long book. I think it was around 12 hours of audiobook, if not more, and I still listened to it fairly quickly. So that tells me that the writing was engaging enough to capture me in a story that necessarily I wasn't interested in the content of. And not interested in the content of, it's just it's not the kind of things that I tend to reach out for often. It's very much like, again, a slice of life of a human being, and maybe because of what I do in my everyday life, and I get to hear people's stories all the time, and I love it, and that's why I do it. But I like, when I read a book, to, I don't know, go down a haunted house corridor or to immerse myself in a fantasy world, because I do get slices of life in all their complexities day in and out from the people I work with, which I love, but I need that time off. So reading a non-fiction like this, I've tried like Sally Rooney's books, for example, cool, but they don't provide me an escape that I really much need. So yeah, I don't have much to say about this. I think this has much appeal for many people though. I completely understand why it's as famous as it is, and I think, again, it does tackle those topics. It doesn't tackle too many topics, and the couple that does, it does in very, you know, with a depth and a characterization that definitely comes through the pages. So I give it 3 stars because it's not my cup of tea, but I can see people giving this 4 to 5 stars easily enough. Now, an horror that I wasn't on my TBR, but I found it on Scribd right as I was finishing Breast and Eggs. This recommendation popped out, and so I said, oh yeah, I know the author because she wrote another horror which I listened to this year, I believed, or the year before, and I really enjoyed it. That other book by this author was a twist on you know, the medium and speaking with the departed that I'd never seen done before. And I loved how horror actually, and how uncomfortable she made me. And I listened to that on audiobook as well. So I thought I liked it enough. The writing was easy enough for me to follow while doing other stuff, because I travel or I do house chores while I listen to an audiobook. So I knew that it was a good match, me and the writing style of this author. This one is the take of the author on a creature similar to vampires. And I'm just gonna keep it very vague. It's blood on her tongue, and again, you follow a twin that goes to her sister's house to assist her because she has fallen ill very suddenly, and it's understanding what's wrong with her, why does she not want any food, and she just craves blood and so on. So yeah, it is the author take on a creature style of vampire. It's slightly different. The author, I think she likes to take like a well-renowned horror topic or horror trope, and make, you know, twist it on its head, which I really appreciated. And it was probably one of the best things I've appreciated of this book. But by no means have enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed a other book. Why? Just because I have, and I've mentioned this when I DNF'd Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V. Schwab. It is, for how much she twisted it on her head, I appreciated it. I didn't DNF it as I DNF'd, for example, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. Couldn't do that. It still didn't feel new enough, or it didn't bring to a table the novelty didn't kind of made up for the fact that some of the things that happened in these I've read in other formats, but content pretty much the same. I also noticed some similarities with her other book. Therefore, at one point when I saw the plot going down that route, I was like, oh, she's gonna do something similar, and she kind of vaguely does it, and it was vague enough, or maybe it was fresh enough for me, the other book, to not be able to avoid comparing the two. I will read for more by this author. I do like her style, and while vampires are very tricky for me these days, because again it's something I've read too much of probably, and I'm starting to find, you know, the appreciating the nuances, because I tend to see the big picture and say, okay, done it already, seen it already, next. I cannot stop and appreciate the nuances as much as I can. I don't know why. Maybe one day I'll be back to, but I in general like how she twists these horror tropes. And the other one, which I was less familiar with, I read less about ghosts and mediums and stuff like that, that was fresh enough to really intrigue me. So I didn't write off the author by any means. I actually gave this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. It wasn't just mind-blowing or as surprising or as exciting as her other release. I wonder if the reading slump is or has left some marks behind, because I have noticed in October that I'm struggling to find like a book that really captures my attention. I get bored way more easily, and I was looking back at my 2025 reading wise, and I thought it was one of the worst reading year I've ever had. And that unfortunately applies to horror as well, because number 2 and 1 are coming up, but by no means those two will enter the Hall of Fame of all, you know, of my favorite horrors. I definitely did not find a gem this year, and overall as a reading month book wise it was quite disappointing. And it is a pity, because I kind of reached out to very popular or very beloved authors of mine, and even them couldn't make the cut. So number 2 of enjoyment, but again this is another 3.5 stars, it's All the Fiends of Hell by Adam L.G. Neville. Now, Neville wrote one of my favorite horror ever, one of my favorite books ever, especially the first part of that book. And so I've been reaching out for anything that he writes. And last year I think I read, what was it? Wasn't as good as well, but I read The Ritual by him. Enjoyed it quite enough. It was definitely spooky. This year I decided to go down his cosmic horror, the standalone cosmic horror. This is about a post-apocalyptic world in UK, while everyone who was on the island, and probably the world, we don't know, we just focus on England, but disappears in the sky. Only the people that were sick or disabled were not taken at the beginning. And then our protagonist, he was on his sick bed. It was a very severe flu, so he gets spared, only to find out that he's one of the few remaining humans in England, and that the few remaining humans are not safe. They are actually being picked apart and killed by these invisible entities as the days progress. A sort of post-apocalyptic alien invasion situation. And despite me not having read much of his genre, I've read enough to know that it's not my thing. And I wanted to give it a try to Neville, because I thought if there is someone who can make me love this genre, it's probably him. And I definitely did not fall in love with it. It definitely felt, again, it has its own take on it. I appreciated its own take. It was entertaining enough. I read this and never thought about putting it down and never picking up. So I didn't think about DNF in this. But at the end I was like, oh, that's it. It wasn't completely new. It wasn't mind-blowing or anything. One thing I really enjoyed was his writing. As always, he delivers when it comes down to his writing. And again, it takes these protagonists that feel very much like your everyday human. You can be yourself, you could be your neighbor. They feel very like, they're not necessarily heroic, they're very normal people, quote unquote, because what is normal, but they feel like people you've met, or you have been, or you are, and that is very refreshing. I did not though love particularly the fact that these creatures, they are semi-described in this book, the monsters if you want, the aliens. I never understood well his descriptions of them, so they remain these very vague and therefore not creepy or scary creatures, because I could not understand from his writing style or from his descriptions what they were supposed to look like. Sometimes I had some glimpses, but was not enough for me to be scared. And yes, there is some violence and atrocities in these, but I found what humans did to each other way more scary than the aliens, and I don't think that was necessarily the idea of the whole idea. So yes, you're confronted with both human depravity and with the alien depravity, and definitely the human one that was, I think, less the focus came through more through the pages for me compared to the aliens ones, because I couldn't picture these aliens. And it's also like a story for the sake of going on this journey without much context, without much history behind or afterwards of events of this story. So I appreciated it for what it was, but it never felt like, I never felt the stakes completely, because we were like, this is a situation, let's see if I survive, and that was it. Like, let's accept that the world is like this, we don't know why, we don't know what's gonna happen after. So there was a vagueness to it that made me feel okay, it was just a story for the sake of being a story, which is what the stories are, Eva. But it didn't feel like he had so many nuances that a book, especially a post-apocalyptic book, might have. When you read a post-apocalyptic book about, the world's being destroyed by climate change, or, humans have destroyed it, so there is a back history. There are like, there are nuances and values that have been fucked up throughout history or throughout modern history in order to lead us where we are here. But now we're like, oh, aliens arrive, so let's survive them if we can, bye. So yeah, I would say if you like the author, you might want to give it a try, but I wouldn't spend much money on this. He's got better stuff out there, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've read better stuff by him, so know that he can do better than that. While for what it was, every page, like the pages and the story and the characters were okay. I enjoyed his writing, I enjoy his characters, but the scope of the story wasn't as impactful as I wish it to be. Number one is a 3.75. Maybe I give it a 4 stars. I don't think it's a full 4 stars. Maybe it depends on the day you ask me. Today I'm extremely exhausted, so today I'm very picky and critical of everything. If you ask me tomorrow if I'm more chilled, maybe I would give it a 4 stars. But yeah, that's the realm of 3.75, 4 stars. Number 1, I will put The Troop by Nick Cutter, which is for some could be, oh yeah, expected. For others, though, for me, it is still a disappointment, because this is such a famous horror book. It's like the best horror lists of so many people. It's my best horror, like one of my favorite ones, and it definitely has not entered mine list of top horrors. I was not particularly impressed overall by this as well. This is a body horror book, and it's the story of this bunch of scouts that are on a weekend trip with their scoutmaster on this island not too far from the mainland. And at one point someone it's not supposed to be on the island arrives and he looks extremely sick, and they are trying to help him without knowing the consequences of, you know, what actually is going on with this man. Start with the positives, because I think it's always a bit more encouraging if I do so. I did enjoy how the characters of the boys were made. I think that their friendships, as well as their family history, and as well as their own character and personality and emotions were well described. So I did, while I don't think it was enough, there was not enough length for me to really, I don't know, really feel attached to these characters, apart from maybe one. Newt, I think it was called. He was my favorite. So apart from that character that touched a soft spot, the other ones I appreciated getting to know them, but again, the stakes didn't come through too much, because they always felt like, because I appreciated the glimpse I got in their life, but they never felt like, oh, I know these boys, these are my boys. He also goes quite heavy-handed on the psychotic kid. The antisocial personality disorder type of kid. He goes very heavy-handed with it, to the point that yes, you are ticking all the boxes of what we would expect for someone, you know, the behaviors and lack of emotions that we would expect, but it felt like almost like too perfect, like it was just, you know, the representation of all antisocial behavior in a way. So it felt a bit heavy-handed, that side of things. The body horror was quite effective. I think it was definitely disgusting, but for me, body horror is not something that distresses me to a degree that makes me truly scared. I find it disgusting, like, what, but I'm not scared. And I do look in my horror more at the scary factor, more at the, you actually generally upset me. You actually generally made me think, you know, for the next week about what you wrote there. While this one, I read it, I go, that's disgusting, and then I move on. So probably body horror, not my genre, not my kind of thing. I enjoyed the ending, it was okay. I enjoyed the fact that it was mixed, you know, you kind of follow also a bit of investigation that goes alongside of what's being released on this island. So I appreciated that there was, you know, an attempt. Compared to this, I appreciate that there was a bit of an attempt to give layers to this story that wouldn't necessarily be discussed directly on page, it might be, you know, mentioned, but there was a degree of, let's go and think about what's happening here, like, you know, what would you think morally about what is going on here. So I appreciate that it brings that discussion to the table. So overall, I think it was okay. I'm glad I read it. It's definitely one that I wanted to, you know, tick off my to be read list. Now I know what everyone is talking about, but there is also part of me that says, well, why everyone is talking about it? Not that I didn't appreciate it, but I don't get all the love. And I would love to have a discussion with someone who absolutely loves this book to pieces. And hopefully they get to, you know, I get to see it too. I think I'm generally more upset that I didn't finish my comics TBR than I am of not having finished my books TBR, because I generally was looking forward to reading all the comics. So what I plan to do is that stays my, you know, the ones I couldn't get around to are the comics I plan to read by the end of the year, and the ones I couldn't get around to were the American Vampire, I couldn't get around to Hellboy, and I couldn't get around to Harrow Country. But I will do a wrap up of all the comics I've read in the year of 2025, in December probably, so stay tuned, because I do plan to read them in November and finish them max in December, so wrapping them up with the rest of things I've read throughout the year. What I'm currently reading, I'm halfway through and really enjoying it. I'm having a good time reading 1 or 2 stories a day. It's Tales from the Crypt. This is volume number 1. You do not start with the first issue, you start with issue 17, and this is an anthology of horror short stories that it's created by, it's curated by many authors. My understanding is that it was very famous back in the days, and it's that kind of campy horror. Some of it, though, I think it's brilliant. And again, because it's an anthology, so short stories, you can read one before bedtime and then move on. There's no string attached, but I'm really having a good time. It's that kind of almost 80s spooky horror. That's not spooky, but it is odd and weird enough and very campy enough to entertain me. So I'm loving that, and hopefully I will finish it soon. So I finished 4 comics for the month of October out of my TBR, and I will start with the least enjoyable one to the most enjoyable one. And these will we have a reverse of what happened with the books. While the books were overall all disappointing, even the one I enjoyed the most, with the comics, even the one I enjoyed the least, it was still a very cool experience to read it, and I still enjoyed it quite a lot. So after number 4 I will put After the Rain. This is taken from a short novella by the author in a series of, like, I don't know if it was a collection of her short stories. Let me see if I can show you some of the art. Apologies for the glare. And this is about a Nigerian American woman that goes back to Nigeria to spend some time with her family, and when she is there, she opens the door to a boy that was not supposed to be alive. And they physically touch each other, and after that she starts going down on a journey of madness, I would say, and magic. And first of all, I could have read these and appreciate these without the dialogue, because the art style was phenomenal. The palette of colors, the drawings, the way nature is chaotic and green and vivid in these was just my cup of tea. So I need to look at more of, you know, those illustrators and follow them, because generally I want to read more. I want to look at more of the art over and over again. The story was okay. It's more like, how would I say it? It's almost like a psychedelic journey. I never taken psychedelic in my whole life, but that's what I would feel like. The chaos, the seeing things that are not there, the mixing of fantasy and reality in a very discombobulated way, that I am very much more into give me the monster, give me the blood and the heads cut off, rather than, you know, something that you interpret, or like you have in visions and you don't know what the upside down is. It's just a personal preference. So the story becomes this very, like, you know, it's a spiral almost into madness. And I appreciated some parts of it. There was some parts that becomes, you know, turned into a physical world, was where I really appreciated. But the rest remained a bit like a journey that felt odd, but not necessarily scary. It didn't scare me. I was fascinated to see what this was going. It kind of felt like watching an episode of Death, Love and Robots, specifically some episodes where you are enchanted by, you know, the graphics, because they're just so brilliant. But the story itself feels almost flimsy, like ephemeral, I don't know, like you cannot touch it properly. You can have an idea, but you don't, it doesn't feel concrete. And that is the experience I have with these, which personally is not the type of horror I love, but many other people would. And to be fair, I was so glad just to read this and experience the art style. Brilliant. And number 3, I put an horror that is horror in its graphics, but the story in itself is a tragedy rather than a horror. And someone would argue, well, if there is horror in such a sad story, and I would agree with you. I think that the horror comes from how brutally real and still relevant this felt, you know, centuries after. So this is a adaptation of The Man Who Laughs, which is a story by Victor Hugo, and the art style is the one that you get on the cover. I have read, I can just show you the first page, because that is enough to tell you what this is, the art style is about. I had no idea what The Laughing Man was. I am not familiar with Victor Hugo writing. I know about him, but I've never read anything by him. And I'm not very familiar with anything that has to do with him, apart from, oh, it's a familiar name. So in a nutshell, this is a story of a boy who is deformed from birth, and he joins a troupe of people that go around the country just playing actor and putting up a play. They're very much poor, just trying to make ends meet, and then all of a sudden something happens that will change his life for what he thinks is the better. But is it? We don't know. And it is very much a social commentary, which I think it was chilling. It was absolutely chilling how relevant this was, and to these days, like the same themes, the way power works, the way society works, the way, you know, the poor has to suffer for the powerful to stay in power, to be rich, and the dynamics in society that are formed because of how power is structured. And you know, it was just brilliant. I loved the message of this. I love the content, and I read then the afterword, and the author, the adaptator of this was saying, you know, I was so surprised of how much of this story actually could be applied to everyday life now. That was draw me to adapt this. Now, apparently The Man Who Laughs is a very contrite and difficult read. It's considered one of the worst books or novellas written by Victor Hugo. And in here though, you don't see any of that. In here you just see the good parts of it. So I was very grateful for having read this in this format. No, I do not plan to go and read the real thing, because even if adaptators of these were like, it's difficult to read. It is very, like, you know, many people put it down and cannot make it. So I think I've got enough of these because I can revisit these, I can reread it and get the same message that I would have gotten through probably forcing myself through a very dense text. And I would definitely suggest these for, especially during this time of year, because the art in itself is so grotesque that it kind of translates into art the grotesqueness of what actually is going on in society, the reality of it. The reality is transformed into the pages in something disgusting and chilling, but that is the whole thing. What is happening is profoundly disgusting. It is profoundly unjust. And I think the art, without the dialogue, translates that and shows it visibly. So love this. The next two are all above 5 stars. In terms of enjoyment wise, I think I chose the second one just because it's not part of a series, it's like a one-off, and the first one is part of a series I've been loving and will hopefully continue loving as it progresses. So that's how I made number 1 or 2, but I love them both. This is my kind of horror. It's an horror that it's quite simple in its premises and it's quite simple in its execution, and yeah, it does pick on the kind of fears that I had as a child, and then even as I grow up, the fear of the dark, of the monster in the dark, the fear of human, quote unquote, depravity and what we can do to each other. And it's that fear that, to me, it's particularly effective. So number 2, but again, it could be equally number 1, I would put Severed by Scott Snyder. Scott Snyder, I think it's behind the story. And then there's the art. Again, I can just show you potentially the cover. Like, my daughter kept turning the page because she couldn't. Fair enough. She didn't want to see the monster on the cover. While you start at the end and then you retrace back what happened to your main protagonist, at the core it's a story of a boy who finds out that his father is still alive somewhere in America, and he wants to go and see who his father is, get to know him, and hopefully pursue a career in music as his father is claiming to be doing. And while he is traveling across America, he comes across a very unsavory character. This is not a take on vampires necessarily, but there was something of the monster that reminded me of that, you know, the brutal, savage side of vampires. So it's not called a vampire, it's not a vampire story in itself, but the brutality of it reminded me of those and the kind of vampires that I grew up reading, and all of this worked for me. In its simple plot line, in its goriness, because it's very gory, but it's also like when you see evil and you want to warn the protagonist, run, run, run. You see your fears become true. And I could really immerse myself in these. I could really put myself through this story. And I was like, this would be like such like a nightmare. Like if I would feel paralyzed by fear if I was in this situation. And so that's why probably it was so effective, because it really made me feel like I would lose my mind if something like this was to happen. And while this has nothing to do with Intensity by Dean Koontz, it gave me the same or very similar feelings of when you're reading about evil that is just so compromised that it's just, there's no boundaries, there's no values. They can commit the most atrocious crime because they generally lack any humanity, and that is terrifying for me. The fact that they're, you know, reading about those people. And so this one, while being a completely different story, the bad guy in it really reminded me of the bad guy in Intensity, for its endless hunger for violence and brutality and human suffering. Now, number one, not on a lighter note, because this was extremely gory, extremely brutal, and again, that this is the type of horror that really works well for me. Is a bit more intricate than something like this. The plot is way more complex, but still very much tangent, very much like steeped in a like fantastic reality that feels a potential reality, though I don't know how to explain it. But I'm talking about number one. I put Something is Killing the Children, book number 2. This is omnibus, so contains 2 to 3 volumes of a normal run. And Something is Killing the Children is currently one of my favorite ongoing series. Just show you the first page, not to spoil anything. And in the first omnibus, you follow this small town where children are picked on and killed by what the town thinks is a serial killer, but not Erica Slaughter. Erica Slaughter comes to town because she knows that when the children says there is a monster in the woods, she believes them, while the adults in the town don't. And her job, Erica's job, is to hunt monsters. This combines things I really enjoy in horror in general: gore, violence, a morally grey main character. I love Erica Slaughter. And also a lore and almost like this kind of this society, you know, hidden from humanity, and the mechanics of this organization, how they work, why they do what they do, and the different families with the different names. There is a lot of mystery surrounding them that slowly we are starting to unpack and see, that I love. So it combines different elements and put them together in a perfect mix, in my opinion. I loved how these dares do something that many books don't. And many books, you know, you get to the peak and then you do get a sort of happy ending, because it's the most traditional approach is all good, trouble, fix trouble, back to good, rapture and repair. And in here there is rapture, and then you do a bit of repair, and then the repair feels still like a rapture, because that's more realistic or like more truth to life. I somehow find it in its sadness, maybe of admitting it, that the way these turn up to be more realistic for the story. The authors dare do something that feels extremely distressing for the reader, but also extremely true to life, because life is not, you know, as Joe Abercrombie says, if you keep telling a story long enough, it never ends with a happy ending. Everything ends up in tragedy. And I think this is what this graphic novel is daring to show us, that there is no happy ending. And I love my happy endings sometimes, but especially when I read horror, when it's meant to be drawing on your fears, scaring you, upsetting you. Having a happy ending in a horror, it's done, it can be done, and I'm not saying that I didn't appreciate it in the past, but somehow it never feels true to life. I don't know how to explain it either way. So anyway, I am loving my reads of Something is Killing the Children. And if you have any recommendations for something similar, please leave them in the comments down below. Leave all your recommendations in the comment down below. Did you have a better spooky reading month? And if so, which books captured your attention? I would love to know. I would love to start already building my TBR for the next October or 2025, because I do like a good horror read, and while I had an amazing time with comics, and I know that I will love the other comics that I am either reading already or will reach out for soon enough, the books were overall just meh, just okay. So I could definitely do with a good horror before the end of the year or as I start 2026. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourself and I hope you go well. Ciao!